For 6 long years, Quando Rondo stayed away from giving the complete story about the night King Von lost his life. But now, fresh after his release, and with everyone paying attention, he's finally breaking his silence and revealing new details about what really went down that night. As of today, Quando Rondo has officially been moved into a halfway house, marking a major turning point in his journey through the federal system. In this video, we're going to break down exactly what life looks like from this point forward and what challenges could be waiting for him around June 2026. Born Tyquan Terrell Bowman in Savannah, Georgia, Quando was transferred from FCI Edgefield in South Carolina to a residential reentry facility in Atlanta, commonly known as a halfway house. It's not complete freedom by any stretch, but it's about as close as the federal system allows before an inmate is fully released. And here's the part that most people aren't talking about. We're going to walk through the official conditions he must follow if he wants to stay out. According to the paperwork, one wrong move could send him right back behind federal bars. Make no mistake, these rules are not optional. The documents function as a legally binding agreement with the federal government, and understanding what's at stake requires looking back at December 2024, when Quando Rondo stood before a federal judge and learned his fate. He ultimately pleaded guilty to a marijuana conspiracy charge, a significant reduction from the original indictment, which also included allegations tied to methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl. When the sentence was
Bowman, otherwise known as rapper Quando Rondo, was sentenced today to 33 months, and that'll be a concurrent sentence.
The sentence was set at 33 months, a number that immediately changed the course of his future. On top of that, any time he had already spent in custody would be credited toward that total, meaning every day behind bars counted toward his eventual release date.
He's already served, the judge ruled, will count towards that sentence, and he'll also pay a $40,000 fine.
Impose 3 years of supervised release, an intense post-prison period where every major decision moved. But the prison sentence and financial penalties were only part of the story. The judge also mandated that independence and responsibility in Quando Rondo's life would remain under the watchful eye of the federal government. During that time, the freedom most people take for granted would come with strict conditions, constant oversight, and very little room for mistakes.
Also ruled that he'll serve 3 years of supervisory release after he is.
Those supervised release conditions go far beyond simply checking in with an officer. They include mental health treatment, mandatory drug screenings, and educational program requirements designed to keep him on a strict path. Quando Rondo officially reported to FCI Edgefield on January 10, 2025. At the very least, his family found some comfort in the fact that the judge allowed him to spend the holiday season at home before turning himself in. Thanks to good behavior credits and his participation in the RDAP program, his initial projected release date of around April 2027 was pushed up significantly to roughly November 2026. Then came a development that caught a lot of people by surprise. His transfer to a halfway house happened in early June, several months earlier than many observers anticipated. Even before entering federal custody, Quando Rondo appeared to be making major changes in his life. He publicly distanced himself from the Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips, stepping away from the gang affiliation that had long been tied to his image. Reports also surfaced that he had converted to Islam, a move that sparked mixed reactions. Some saw it as a sincere spiritual awakening and a sign of personal growth, while others questioned whether it was a strategic decision aimed at improving his standing within the prison system.
Said he had dropped his flag. All right, cool. Smart decision.
Whether it was a carefully planned strategy, a genuine personal change, or a combination of both, one thing is undeniable: the outcome was real. He secured an early transfer, something many people in similar situations never achieve. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Life in a halfway house comes with a long list of rules that can dictate nearly every part of his daily routine, and some of those restrictions hit especially hard for someone with his level of fame and lifestyle. He cannot engage in criminal activity of any kind. He is prohibited from possessing or using controlled substances. He must comply with mandatory drug testing whenever required. Probation officers have the authority to visit and monitor him at any time. He is also required to provide financial records and information if requested. His residence and personal property can be searched without a warrant. And then there's one particular condition that could end up changing the entire direction of his career moving forward.
Know someone has been convicted of a felony, you must not knowingly communicate or interact with that person without first getting permission.
For Quando Rondo, that restriction isn't some hypothetical rule sitting on a piece of paper. The reality is that both his personal life and music career are deeply connected to people with felony convictions, beginning with the very artist who helped build the platform he's standing on today. And if you ask a probation officer, that's where things can get complicated fast because of NBA Youngboy. NBA Youngboy, born Contrell Gaulden, isn't simply Quando Rondo's label head. He's a major business partner, creative collaborator, and a central figure in the infrastructure surrounding Quando's career. If every interaction with a convicted felon requires federal approval, then suddenly every studio session, every conversation, every text message, and every business discussion carries added risk. One misunderstanding or violation could potentially put him right back in federal custody. He's also required to avoid contact with known gang members unless specific permission is granted, while continuing to participate in educational and community-based programs. Then, around June 2026, Quando Rondo went live from the halfway house and gave fans a glimpse into his mindset. He spoke about being thankful for another opportunity, taking care of his children, managing financial obligations, and staying focused on avoiding the mistakes that led him to prison in the first place. Throughout the conversation, he emphasized that he had no desire to repeat the cycle of incarceration. And perhaps most notably, he referenced not wanting his story to end the way Lil Durk's legal troubles have unfolded, a comment that immediately caught the attention of viewers familiar with Durk's highly publicized situation.
The question remains, can he stay out of harm's way? Quando Rondo is a cool dude, solid.
Whether those promises hold up over time is a question only the future can answer. But what truly grabbed people's attention after Quando Rondo's release was something entirely different. It was a move that instantly brought an old controversy back into the spotlight. A chapter nearly 6 years old was suddenly reopened, and for many, the emotions surrounding it had never fully healed. Not long after his release, an interview began making the rounds online. During that conversation, Quando Rondo did something viewers had been waiting years to see. He gave one of the most detailed accounts he's ever shared about the events leading up to the night King Von was killed. There was no dramatic spin or attempt to reshape the narrative. Instead, he spoke directly about what he witnessed, what unfolded around him, and how those moments played out from his perspective.
People coming. I'm about to let these people walk past.
He's referring to the early hours of November 6, 2020, outside the Monaco Hookah Lounge in Atlanta, the location where one of hip-hop's most talked-about tragedies unfolded. According to Quando Rondo, 2 separate groups encountered each other that night, and when he noticed people approaching, he chose not to force his way through the crowd. Instead, he says he stepped to the side and allowed them to move past. As I saw them coming, I wasn't trying to push through anybody or create any kind of issue, so I just backed off and let their group come through. Based on his account, he wasn't advancing toward the other side or looking for a confrontation. He says he was simply making room and letting them pass by. But then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed.
Oh, a nigga hit me. You feel me? Boom, bam.
Without any warning, catching him completely off guard. That That phrase, out-of-body experience, has become the emotional center of Quando Rondo's entire version of what happened the night King Von was killed. He has used it before in earlier interviews, but this time it hits differently. This isn't a rapper navigating controversy in real time or carefully managing public perception under pressure. This is a man who has spent time inside a federal prison cell, who has been released into a halfway house, and who now, despite every reason to stay silent, has chosen to revisit the moment that changed everything. For years, Quando Rondo avoided laying out the full details of that shooting. He would acknowledge it, but only in fragments. In a 2021 multi-part interview with Angela Yee, he insisted he had no prior issues with Vaughn, denied claims about snatching a chain, and described the night as chaotic and overwhelming. In separate conversations with DJ Academics and Big U, he suggested the conflict could have been avoided entirely if handled through music instead of violence. And in a 2024 appearance on No Jumper, he made it clear he wasn't concerned with criticism from people who were never his supporters. But across all of those interviews, one thing stayed consistent. He never fully walked through the sequence of events. I saw them coming, I moved aside, I got hit, and then I lost control of my own body. That is the version he finally brought into full focus. He hasn't changed his core position, self-defense, struck first, not the shooter, but the way he says it now carries a different weight, more precise, more settled, like someone who has replayed every second of that night over and over during long stretches of isolation, deciding exactly how he wants the story to be understood when he finally speaks without interruption. And the timing of this interview matters. It arrived while hip-hop was already deep in ongoing fallout. Lil Durk's federal case, renewed debates about drill music and violence, and a broader question hanging over the culture about whether anyone involved in these cycles can ever truly break free from them. Quando Rondo's account doesn't resolve those arguments, but it reframes the center of them. The person at the heart of the story is still here, still speaking, and still standing by the same account he's held onto since day one. To understand why his words carry so much weight, though, you have to return to the beginning, the early hours of November 6, 2020, in downtown Atlanta, when everything first spiraled out of control outside the Monaco Hookah Lounge on Trinity Avenue. Around 3 a.m., the parking lot was packed with people spilling into the street, two separate entourages converging in the same space at the same time. One was with King Von, Davon Daquan Bennett, the 26-year-old Chicago drill star riding massive momentum off tracks like his Crazy Story series. The other was with Quando Rondo, Taekwon Terrell Bowman, a melodic rapper from Savannah, Georgia, signed to NBA YoungBoy's Never Broke Again label. There was no deep personal history between Vaughn and Rondo before that night. The tension was more indirect, tied into the wider NBA YoungBoy and Lil Durk rivalry, driven by affiliations, label politics, and online exchanges, rather than any direct personal feud. Vaughn was closely tied to Lil Durk's Only the Family movement, deeply connected to Chicago's O-Block scene. Rondo was in NBA YoungBoy's orbit. There were smaller flashpoints, social media tension, public appearances, and industry overlap, but nothing that, on paper, should have led to gunfire. Yet it did. Surveillance footage later circulated widely, showing the moment everything turned. King Von approached and physically confronted Quando Rondo, throwing the first punches and triggering a brawl between both entourages. In seconds, the situation collapsed into chaos, fists, bodies, confusion, and noise overtaking the parking lot. Then Timothy Leaks, known as Lul Tim, a close associate of Quando Rondo, pulled a firearm and fired multiple shots, striking Vaughn in the back and upper body. The scene escalated instantly. Members of Vaughn's group returned fire, and nearby Atlanta police officers already in the area engaged as gunfire broke out, turning the lot into a crossfire of panic, movement, and confusion. 6 people were shot. 3 ultimately died. King Von, transported to the hospital, passed away the following day at 26. Mark Blakely, an O Block affiliate, also died, along with another member of Vaughn's circle who later succumbed to injuries. Lul Tim was also struck and severely injured, requiring surgery and a long recovery. Quando Rondo himself was not shot and has consistently maintained he did not fire any weapon. In the aftermath footage, he can be seen helping his associate get to safety and receive medical attention, an image that has since been interpreted in completely opposite ways depending on perspective. To some, it shows loyalty in a chaotic moment. To others, it became part of a narrative of escalation that night. King Von was just 26 years old, fresh off the release of Welcome to O Block, an album that had positioned him as one of the fastest-rising storytellers in drill music. His death didn't just end a life, it interrupted a career many believed was only beginning to peak. The impact rippled far beyond Chicago, hitting the drill community like a collective shockwave. And in the aftermath, the story split into two versions that have never fully aligned since. A beloved artist was taken in the prime of his career, a generational voice silenced in a way that left the entire culture stunned. On the other side, Quando Rondo supporters maintained a completely different interpretation, arguing that he was attacked first and that his associates stepped in to protect him when things turned violent. Even 6 years later, neither side has backed away from their version of events, and there is no sign of that changing anytime soon. Shortly after the incident, Quando Rondo released a track titled End of Story, and many listeners immediately connected the lyrics to what had just happened, interpreting them as a defense of self-defense and his associate, Lul Tim. Rondo later pushed back on that interpretation, saying it was never meant as a direct diss. He also claimed he wasn't aware of Vaughn's Crazy Story series, a statement that surprised many, given how widely those songs had circulated at the time. Still, regardless of intent, the record only intensified an already explosive situation across hip-hop. From there, things escalated further. Certain performance moments in 2021 were widely interpreted as disrespectful toward Vaughn's memory, which deepened the divide even more. Lil Durk and the OTF camp publicly mourned Vaughn in raw, emotional ways, channeling that grief into a visible demand for accountability. Diss records followed, social media became increasingly hostile, and subliminal shots turned into direct confrontations through music and online exchanges. Even Vaughn's uncle publicly stated that pressure would continue on Quando Rondo's circle, signaling that the tension was far from fading. What began as tragedy in music quickly bled into the legal system as well. Lul Tim was arrested and charged with felony murder in connection with Vaughn's death while he was already hospitalized from his own injuries. He was later released on bond as the case moved through Fulton County. Then, in 2023, the situation took a major turn when charges were dismissed before reaching a grand jury, a decision confirmed by his attorney. The dismissal was heavily influenced by Georgia's Stand Your Ground law, which allows the use of deadly force without a duty to retreat if someone reasonably believes they are in imminent danger. Surveillance footage showing King Von initiating the physical confrontation became a key factor in the self-defense narrative, along with the fact that Lul Tim was also shot during the exchange. Prosecutors ultimately concluded that securing a conviction would be unlikely, and the case was dropped before it could proceed to trial. Because of that, no courtroom ever fully examined the evidence in front of a jury. There was no cross-examination, no sworn testimony under trial conditions, and no formal verdict. Instead, the public has been left to piece together the truth through surveillance clips, police reports. Legally speaking, that is where the matter stands. But in reality, being cleared by the courts never translated into being cleared in the court of public opinion. Instead, the dismissal became its own flashpoint in the ongoing narrative. For Quando Rondo's supporters, it was seen as validation and proof that the legal system had recognized their version of events. For King Von's fanbase, however, it was viewed as a deep miscarriage of justice. From that moment on, online debates only intensified, with constant arguments over whether stand-your-ground laws were correctly applied or strategically used to avoid accountability. Hip-hop commentators dissected every detail from multiple angles, turning the case into a wider cultural conversation rather than a closed legal file. What started as a discussion about one night in Atlanta expanded into a much larger debate about self-defense, loyalty, and who ultimately controls the narrative when no courtroom verdict is ever delivered. Even now, Von's supporters, members of O Block and the broader Only the Family circle, and a large portion of hip-hop audiences still hold Quando Rondo and his camp responsible for the tragedy. And while the legal system may have closed the case on paper, the emotional and cultural fallout has only continued to deepen the divide.
As a situation, but he didn't start the situation. He didn't, quote unquote, end the situation.
That distinction between provoking and actually initiating may be the most honest way to summarize Quando Rondo's role in everything that followed. He didn't start the fight, and he didn't pull the trigger, but he also didn't always choose silence in the aftermath. Instead, he stepped into clubhouse rooms where King Von supporters were active and engaged in heated, often inflammatory exchanges that only kept tensions alive. He was also banned from a shopping mall after allegedly showing up despite prior warnings, another moment that added fuel to an already volatile situation. On top of that, he released music and made public statements that, while within his rights, ensured the spotlight never fully moved away from him. In a culture where words can carry the same weight as actions, even a lyric or a live stream comment can ignite real-world consequences, and that reality became impossible to ignore. And those consequences didn't stay online. The anger and resentment eventually spilled into the physical world in the most devastating way. After King Von's death, threats against Quando Rondo escalated from every direction. Shows were canceled, and the backlash from Von's fanbase became constant and relentless. But the danger wasn't limited to social media or lost performances. It became real, violent, and irreversible. On August 19, 2022, in Los Angeles near a gas station close to the Beverly Center, gunmen who had reportedly been tracking Quando Rondo for hours opened fire on his vehicle in what investigators later described as a coordinated ambush. Rondo survived, but his cousin, Savita Lul Pob Robinson, was killed in the attack. He was not the intended target, but he became another tragic casualty in a cycle of violence that had been building since that night in Atlanta. Federal prosecutors later alleged the shooting was not random street violence, but a planned murder-for-hire operation. At the center of that allegation, they named Lil Durk, a claim that immediately escalated the situation from street-level conflict to a federal case with massive implications. The case transformed what began as a tragic altercation outside a hookah lounge into a sprawling legal and cultural saga involving major figures in hip-hop and law enforcement agencies. By October 2024, Lil Durk and several OTF affiliates were federally charged in connection with the alleged conspiracy. Prosecutors argued that the plot was a direct retaliation for King Von's death, supported by alleged coordination, financial links, and communication tied to tracking Quando Rondo's location. Durk was arrested while reportedly attempting to leave the country and has pleaded not guilty, with his trial timeline continuing to shift toward 2026 or later. When news of the indictment reached Quando Rondo while he was still incarcerated, his response was notably different from what many expected. Instead of celebration or retaliation, he posted messages focused on forgiveness, prayer, and moving forward, referencing faith and a desire to leave the cycle of conflict behind. Whether that shift represents genuine transformation or strategic restraint is something only he can fully answer. What cannot be ignored, however, is the human cost left in its wake. King Von is gone. Lil Pop is gone. Others were injured or permanently affected. Lil Durk now faces serious federal charges that could define the rest of his life. Lil Tim, though legally cleared, carries the permanent weight of that night. And through it all, Quando Rondo remains at the center of a story that refuses to fade. Even as he continues releasing music, building projects, and pushing forward creatively, everything he does is still filtered through that single night in Atlanta. The halfway house is not an ending, it's a transition point, a pause between the past that follows him and the future he is still trying to build. When he eventually walks out fully, the world he returns to will not be blank.
It will remember everything. The fans, the courts, the industry, and the culture itself will continue to interpret him through the lens of what happened in 2020. And that is what makes this story so heavy. It is not a chapter that closes, but a consequence that continues to unfold.